We're up to the Mishnah now on Daf Tes Amud Aleph. And this Mishnah deals with a concept called Tashlumin, which applies in our context here in Masechet Chagiga if he did not bring his Karmel Chagiga on the first day of Yontif. Michelo Chag means he didn't bring his Karmel Chagiga. The Yontif Rishon Shel Ogeg Es Kol HaRegel. He has the entire balance of the Moed to bring his Karmel Chagiga. We don't say Avar Zmano Botol Karbono. And not only that, Ubi Yontif Achron Shel Chag. We're talking about Sukkot, and the Yontif Achron is what we call Shmini Atzeres. He can bring his Karmel Chagiga even on Shmini Atzeres. That means the Tashlumin for the first day of Yontif extends throughout Sukkot and overlaps into Shmini Atzeres. And this is a big chiddush because Shmini Atzeres is called Regel B'fnei Atzma. As far as Chagiga is concerned, for some reason, we'll see how the Gemara derives this. We're not going to define and categorize Shmini Atzeres as a separate regel. It's an extension of Sukkot. Of our regel v'lochad, if even after Shmini Atzeres he hasn't yet brought his Karmel Chagiga, eino chai b'achriyusa. He doesn't have to be mashlim by bringing a carbon to replace the carbon that he didn't bring. He's not chai b'achriyus. So that's not good news because the guy is now in trouble. He went through all of Yontif. He didn't bring his Shalmei Chagiga. He's basically what you call a mavatel mitzvah seishel Torah. V'alzen nemar, posing in Koheles, me'uvas lo yuchal liskon, v'cheschon lo yuchal limonos. He lost an opportunity of a mitzvah say, and it'll never come by again. Now, once the Mishnah quotes this pasuk in Koheles about some sort of a distortion, a kilkul that cannot be fixed up, there's no rectification, so the Mishnah continues interpreting that pasuk. Me'uvas lo yuchal liskon. Rav Shimon Asi Omer Eizim Me'uvas she'eino yochal liskon ze abala erev v'holy min hamamzer. If you bring a mamzer into the world, then that kilkul that you've created through your avera is lo yuchal lisakin. There's no way that you can rectify it. It's omei tamim. Now here he quotes Tosas HaRosh. Tosas HaRosh says, "What do you mean? Are you telling me that lo yuchal lisk? Okay, he did a terrible thing. He was bala erva. There's a mamzer, but you're telling me that the avera continues liomei ad. There's no takana. The aim." He says, "Ein lecha davar she'ein tshuva moeles kenegda." Tshuva works for everything, so you can rectify. And the Tosas HaRosh is so moved by this kasha that he says, you know what Elo Takana means? Boshto. There's no Takana to his humiliation. Because anytime somebody sees the mamzer that he brought into the world, they're going to say, oh, he was guilty of that avera. So that boshes is tamid, and you can't be masaking that boshes. Nothing you do will change and terminate that humiliation. How does Rav Shimon ben Asi know that it's bala erev of a holy mamzer? Im Tomar, why not say, if you want to be argumentative, begonev begozel, he stole something. So that can't be, says Rav Shimon, because Yachal zero. He's obligated in Hashava. And Rashi points out that even if the Gneva or the Gzelu was destroyed, he can pay its money and compensate him b'damim. also says that in the case of a gazlan, ein boshto nikar, she'ein maseya me'idim lifneim b'chol hazman. That if we interpret Bala Erva, the holy man of Mamzer, as Busha, and he can't be Masakin that Busha, in the case of someone who stole something, you could be Masakin the Busha, because there's nothing testifying about the fact that this was stolen. Shimon Yochai Omer, Ein Kori Ma'uvas Elolamisha Yemesukan Betchila V'nis Aves. The word Ma'uvas means that it was perfect and then it was distorted. It had to have been tov before the kill, and then you can call it Ma'uvas. So that's not going to apply to Bala Erev. Because from the moment the child is born, the kilkel is already there. The Eza, so what is the pasuk talking about? He was good. He started out tov. He was studying Torah, but niskalke, he got spoiled. He got ruined. He got contaminated. We would say today in our language, he went off the derech. And that's ma'ava lo yuchal liskon. Why is that ma'ava lo yuchal liskon? Because it was tov and then it became a kulpa. But what does it mean that it's lo yuchal liskon? Oh, the Maharsha is bothered by the fact that the Bala Erva, which Rav Shimon Bar Yochai apparently rejects as a candidate for this pasuk, is also tov lechatchila. Before he was Bala Erva, he was tov. So Maharsha answers, what Rav Shimon Bar Yochai requires is asiyas tov mitchila, not sur meira, but asiyas tov. But I don't understand why this is called this Yuchal Liskon. He quotes here a Yerushalmi that the Torah itself, when you separate yourself from the Torah, is HaTorah Poresh Mimisha Poresh Mimena. And the Yerushalmi quotes a pasuk, Im Tazveni Yom Yomayim Azvek. You have any note on this, Rabbi Rhodes?
The note here is from Erie.
Oh, let me hear, because I don't have.
Yeah. Feel Misha Tzadik Amor Av. Ibed et mitzotav harishonot. Zel vaday ivet v'sid shem yut v'he.
Wow. He's talking like Toel or Shona. Interesting.
All that you learned beforehand.
But I'm just wondering out loud, this the Meiri?
Yeah.
Who am I to argue against the Meiri? But I was wondering if a person was Poresh and then he does tshuva, maybe he can resurrect from the dead all his ma'asim. That's not the Meiri, but I'm just wondering. You know, I'm a big believer in tshuva. Because in for example, the writings of Rabbi Nassan, what tshuva means is something called bina, which is l'malam and azman, so that when you do tshuva, all the experiences of kilkul are all, so to speak, in front of you. They're not like past and so forth. It's not something that belongs in the past. So even if at some point he was porish minat Torah, he can probably do tshuva on being parish ben Torah. I don't know. Anyway, so the Gemara now says the following: Minoni milu. How do we know that Shmini Atzeres lends itself to tashlumin for the Chagiga, the Korban Chagiga? Omer Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shmuel, Nemar Atzeres b'Shvi Shel Pesach, v'Nemar Atzeres b'Shmini Shel Chag, Ma lahalan b'tashlumin, afkan l'tashlumin. Since the seventh day of Pesach is part of Pesach, as far as tashlumin, so the Gzeres Shava of Atzeres is going to teach me that even Shmini Atzeres is part and parcel of the regular of Sukkot as far as tashlumin is concerned for the Korban Chagiga. Now, we have a principle with regard to Gzeres Shava that if it's mufne, then there's no pirch. What does that mean, mufne? If these two identical words are redundant, each one respectively in its place, that's called mufne. And such a Gzeres Shava is hands down. It's absolutely invincible. If, on the other hand, you have a Gzeres Shava, which is not mufna, then it lends itself to a pirch. So the Gemara says mufna. The word atzeres that's being used as a Gzeres Shava is mufna. It's redundant. The ilav, if you're not going to agree that it's mufna, equal a mifra. I have a great pirch on this equation, on this analogy. L'shvi shel pesach shekain eino cholok mishal afana. Shvi Shel Pesach has the same identical dinim as the balance of Pesach, the days before it. Tomar, you're going to drive conclusions about Shmini Shel Chag, which is Shmini Atzeres, Shecholok Big Mishal Afana. It doesn't have the same dinim as the 7 days of Sukkot that preceded it. So the Gemara says, Lai afnuye mufne. Lai means be'emes. It really has to be so that it's mufne. Why is it mufne? Michti. My atzeres. What does the word atzeres mean? Otzubiasis malacha. It's going to teach you that you have to refrain from malacha. Vaksiv. It already says in the Pasuk Tasim malacha. Is atzeres the kosvach one alamali? Why did the Torah have to add the word atzeres? El shmami lafnuye, only for the purpose of teaching us a Gzeres Shava. Now, what does the Gemara mean when it says Tomar b'shmini shel chag shecholog b'lefanov? So that's a sugya later on in Daf Yitzayim, which is called Pazar Kashav, which are Rashi Tevis for pious. Man, which means Shechiyanu, and then Reish is for Regel, has a separate status as a Regel. Then we have Pei for Purim. There are different numbers of Purim that you have to bring. Actually, on Shmini it says you bring one par, if I remember correctly. Then Kashav. So the kuf of Kashav is Karbanos, and the shin is Shir, separate Shir. Reish. What's the base? I mean, so again. Zarkav. Shir. Oh, bracha. So he says that Rashi Shit in bracha is the bracha showing mevarchem esamel pishmini atzeres zecher l'shlomo amel. Rav Salvation used to say that that's the reading of the Zosa Broch. So finally, we've established, based on this Gzeres Shabbat Atzeres Atzeres, that Shmini Atzeres is Tashlumin for the Chagiga of Sukkot. V'tana Maisi La Mihach. We have another brisa that has a different source, and we're going to derive it from the parasha of Chag HaSukkos when it says V'chagosem also Chag Lashem Shivas Yomi. And the word V'chagosem means Korban Chagiga. Yochel Yechogeg V'holech Kol Shiva. Right? What does this mean? Yochel Yehei Chogeg V'holech Kol Shiva. I might think that on every single day of Sukkot you have to bring a Korban Chagiga. Tamalomer Osa. Osa is a meal. Osa Atachogeg V'atachogeg Kol Shiva. Nu in Kain Lama Nemar Shiva. So why does the Torah say Shiva? Right? Lama Inyan Chagiga, it says Shiva. Tashlumin. That there are 7 days of Tashlumin for the Korban Chagiga. Matem Tzrichim? Beseder.
לראות נזילה.
לראות נזילה?
יש נזילה.
כן. אז מה אתה צריך? ממני.
ממך כלום. תראה לי איפה הנזילה. או שאני אדבר איתה.
כן, הכי חשוב זה תדבר איתה.
אני אדבר איתה.
אני חושב אולי הנזילה היא בשירותים פה. אני חושב, אני לא 100%. Okay, and came Loman Emar Shiva Tashlumin. Right, so he didn't bring the Korban Chagiga on the first day, he could be mashlim it on the other days. So it means that he has 7 days for the Korban Chagiga. Minayin Shimlo Chag, Yontav Rish Shal Chag, Shechog V'Holy Kol HaRegel, Ach V'Yontav Ach, meaning Shmini Atzeres, Talmud Lomar, B'Chodesh HaShvi, Tochogu Osa. Now, Chodesh HaShvi means the entire month of Tishrei. So it must be a reboot. So what is it coming to be Marveh? It means all the holy days in the month of Tishrei, meaning Shmini Atzeres as well. So maybe he has Tashlum in the entire month of Tishrei. Tamalomer also, we go back to the miyut of also. Also atachogeg v'atachogeg chutalo. Okay. Now we have the gigantic machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Oshia. This is a sugya that you could spend a week on, but we'll just do it superficially. I tashlum. How do we understand the concept of tashlumim with regard to the karbonos, in our case, to Shalmei Chagig? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, tashlum l'rishon. You are chayav to bring the Korban Chagig on the first day of Yom Tov. You didn't bring it, then you are fulfilling through Tashlumin your chova of that first day. Rabbi Oshia Amar, Tashlumin zeh zeh. Rabbi Oshia says no. Every single day generates its own chiyuv. It's not a chiyuv and a mitzvah on the first day, and therefore each day is a separate machayev. My beinayu. Amar Rabbi Zera, Chiger b'yom Rishon v'nispashit b'yom Sheni k'beinayu. He was potur on the first day of Yom Tov because he couldn't walk on his feet. Nebuch, he was lame. But then nispashit, he had a great refuah. He went to a great, chiropractor, whatever it was. And b'yom Sheni, Now on the second day, he's able to bring his karbanos, the karbanos of Yontif. Is Ikabenayu. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Tashlum Rishon, he wasn't chayv on Rishon. Why? Because he was a chiger. Is Kevin de Lochazi Barishon, Lochazi B'Sheni. There's no obligation to set up Tashlum, and he doesn't even have the opportunity of setting up Tashlum because he wasn't chayv on the first day. And Rabbi Yochanan holds that the entire halach of Tashlumin is L'Rishon. Rabbi Oshi Omar Tashlumin Zelazeh, each day is a separate mechayev, and therefore Afal Gav to Lo Chazi. V'Rishon, even though he wasn't a bar chiyuv on the first day, he was a chiger, but Chazi B'Sheni, now in this pashe, he becomes chayiv on the second day. The second day itself engenders its own chiyuv. Beautiful. Machlokes, fundamental machlokes about the nature of Tashlumin, according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Oshia. Very much reminds me, there's a machlokas in the poskim in Orach Chaim, Nebuch Onen, who does not recite Havdalah Motzi Shabbos. After the burial of his dead, does he recite Havdalah? If the first day, 3 days of the week is a Tashlumin for Motzi Shabbos, so he wasn't chayiv on Motzi Shabbos, he was an Onen. If on the other hand, every day that he didn't make Havdalah is Mechayiv its own Havdalah, then he's got to make Havdalah. But there are many nafkaminos. And now we're going to talk about Nazirus. A Nazir, as you know, is enjoined from being Matami Lamesi. And if he contracted Tumas Mes, he's going to have to count 7 days L'Taraso. And like any Tami Mes, he needs Hazah, B'Shlishi B'Shvi, with the Mei Chatas, Mei for Paraduma. And then he's Tovel, he has to shave off his hair, and he's Tov. On the 8th day, he brings a korban. It's called Shtei Torim or Shnei B'nei Yonah. One is Chatz, one is an Olam. He also brings an Asham, that's Keves Echad Li-Asham. Then he starts counting his Naziris from the beginning. Hayom Rishon of Yipur. So he's got to get a malos of what's called Naziris Shaltar. And all the days that he counted before he got Tumah, Yiplu, they're B'Telim and B'Tolim. Okay. The Mishnah says in Masechet Krisus on Daf Tes that a Nazir who is Nitma Tumas Harbe brings only one set of karbanos. And he knocks off all the various Tumas that he was Nitma. What does that mean? Let's say he completed his Tara, and he reached the 7th day of Tara, because as we said before, he needs 7 days of Tara from Tumas Mes. Then after he finished the 7 days of Tara, he again became Tumah. He again contracted Tumah, had a contact with the corpse. And even though now he was Mitame as Naziris a second time around, he still brings only one set of karbanos. Why? And here's the major punchline. Kevan shel nischayev hadayin lahavi karban al tumas harishon. His chiyuv karban emerges on the 8th day, but he saw tumah after the 7th day, on the night going into the 8th day. So that's not a new tumah as far as karbanos is concerned. It's all one long tumah. And he can be yotze with one set of karbanos for both of his contaminations of his tmeos, of his tumos. But let's say he reached the 8th day on which he's chai, right after 7 days of Tara, he reached the 8th day. It's now the 8th day, and he's chayiv to bring a karban, right? The 3 karbanos. Now he became tumah. In such a place, you can't say that it's all part of the original tumah. Then it's a brand new tumah. The moment the chiyuv karban emerges on the 8th day, then he has a new tumah. If he was nitma, he's going to have to bring 2 sets of karbanos. Now, in the light of that introduction, Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi, can it be the Rabbi Yochanan holds that you cannot have tashlum or a carbon, if you weren't, one second, I'm sorry. I'm just going to close this. Oh, come back from school. Oh, to the Shilutim. Talepo shtei madrigot f'tikach yibim. Okay. Again, me Rabbi Yochanan Hachi. Right, Rabbi Yochanan, we saw in Chagiga, says that if you weren't chayv on the first day, there's no tashlumin. How are we going to apply this in the case of a nazir shenitma v'yom hashmini? Because Omar Chizkiya, again, this is going to be Chizkiya's opinion. We're about to learn Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, but first let's learn Chizkiya's opinion. Nitma, if the nazir became tamei v'yom hashmini, then mevi karba nosaf al tumas. He's going to have to bring a second set of karbanos because he's already finished up his first tumah. He has the full 7 days of Tara, plus it's the 8th day when he's chayiv a carbon. So now, if he's nitma, he needs another carbon. However, Balayla, if he became tamei on the night after the 7th, going into the 8th, then he's not yotzei mechlal tum rishon. He can bring one set of karbanos. Why? Because there's no akrava Balayla. So you cannot tell me that he's already chayav in a carbon for the first tumah. And therefore, when he has the second tumah that he contracted, he is now chayav one set of karbanos for both tumahs. But Rabbi Yochanan Amar, af balayla nami mevi. Even if he was nitma balayla, that means the night going into the 8th day, he's got to have to bring another carbon, another set of karbanos. Why? Because once he was tovel on the 7th day, and now he had what's called harif shemesh, he was nitar mitum aso, and then at that point on the night after the 7th, he became chayev in the carbon. And even though you'll argue, but Lila, you can't bring a carbon at night, but nevertheless, chal of chovas hakrava, he has a chiyav hakrava. The kaven shukvar mechuyev ba'akravas hakarban, kasher shav v'nitma, once he was chayiv in the carbon, now he became tamei again. That's a brand new tomb. And he's going to have to bring 2 sets of karbanos, one for the tumah rishona and another one for the tumah shniya. And the carbon that he brings for tumah rishona is midin tashlumin, on the carbon that he couldn't bring on the 8th day because he became tamei. And that carbon was lo hayuroi klal aviv. Why? Because it's the night going into Shmini. And he can't be makriv the carbon because ein makrivin karbanos b'layla. So now we have a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan holds that there's no such thing as tashlumin on a carbon that was eino roy lavia. For example, he was a chiger on Yom Rishon. So there's no tashlumin for the chagiga during the balance of the chag. Here also, if he couldn't bring his carbon on the 8th day because he was tamei, and that means that the night going into the 8th day, he couldn't bring his carbon. It was eino roy lahavi carbon because ein makrivin carbon balayla. Then how could there be tashlumin for that carbon? He was eino roy lahavi. He's like the chiger on the first day of Chag. So the Gemara makes one attempt and rejects it. Amar Rab Yirmiyah shiny tuma As a general rule, if you can't bring your carbon, then there's no tashlum. If you couldn't bring your carbon at the time that the chiv carbon emerged, there's no tashlum. That's Rabbi Yomi. But what happens in a case where the reason why you couldn't bring your carbon was because of tumah? There, the Torah has a whole new set of rules. And where do we learn this from? Pesach Sheni. He was tameh on the 14th of Nisan. So he was Eino Roy Lakrov, and yet he has Tashlumin a month later on Yudal Be'iyah. So we see that there are two different categories of Dechiyah. One person is Dochui from a carbon because, let's say, he's a Chiger. The other person is Dochui because he's a Tameh. With regard to all Dechuyim, there's no Tashlumin if he wasn't Roy from the beginning. That's Rabbi Yochanan Shita. But in the case of Tumah, that's not considered Dechiyah. So you can't ask a kasha from Nazir to Chagiga, because if a person is a Chagiga on Yom Tov Rishon and Nisrapi B'Sheni, he was not Roy Lavi Karbano because of his Chigrus. There's no Tashlum. But in a Nazir, who became Tameh on the night of the 8th, that's a different kind of halacha, and there we say there is Tashlumin, and we saw it by the case of Carbon Pesach. The Gemara rejects. Maskif lo Rav Papa, ha nichol leman diyoma. Pesach, Sheni Tashlumin l'Rishon, who we're now on the top of Pesach and Beis, meaning that there's no din of Pesach Sheni unto itself. Pesach Sheni is a Tashlumin for the Rishon. But Laman Diyoma, Pesach Sheni Regel B'Fnei Atzmo, who it's not Tashlumin for Rishon, this is a machlokes between Rebbe and the Chachamim in Psachim Tzadik Gimel. Rebbe holds that Pesach Sheni is a Regel B'Fnei Atzmo, it's not Tashlumin l'Rishon, and even if he wasn't Roy to be Chayiv in Pesach Rishon, he became Roy in Pesach Sheni, let's say a Kodesh Higdil, or Gersh is Gaia between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, he's Chayiv in Pesach Sheni. And who argues against Rebbe? That's Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi Nosson says that Pesach Sheni is Tashlum l'Rishon. And if he wasn't Chayiv b'Rishon, he was not Jewish, or he was a Katan, then there's no Pesach Sheni for him. There's no Tashlum. So Laman V'Yomar Pesach Sheni Regel B'Fnei Atzmo, according to Rebbe Shita, it's not a Tashlum for Pesach Rishon, then you cannot derive the conclusion from Pesach Sheni that there's a carbon that was Nidcha Mipnei Atuma, and it has Tashlumin. Because there is no Tashlumin in the case of Pesach Sheni, it's a Regel B'Fnei Atzmo. Ma'ikol Meimar, we're back to the stira between Rabbi Yochanan and the Chiger, and Rabbi Yochanan in the case of a Nazir Shenitma Bilel Shmi. That's going to lead us to Ella Omar Rav Papa, which in Mitzvah Hashem we'll have to leave for tomorrow. So let's make a note of where we got up to. Ella Omar Rav Papa.